Will, thank you for joining us here on the Science of Psychotherapy podcast. It's so great to meet you.
It's great I've engaged with Richard a lot over the past few years, and so it's great to actually be virtually face-to-face with the two of you. And I love the podcast, and you did something that a lot of us did. We get locked down, and then we create podcasts.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, and it is great to see. I realize this is the first time we've actually sort of had a live engagement, and I was thinking, I all kinds of, you have an accent, you do this, you like to wear hats, but there's lots of really, but it is interesting, all this stuff of the which ties into what we're going to talk about. It's the nature of the way we connect with nature. What's natural, what's not natural, why do we do it? And I mean, I've been following nature therapy and outdoor therapies and things for a long, long time. Some really interesting people I've met over the years. So when you came into the space, I just thought, interesting guy, I'm sure. And you are. So we want to tease out a little bit. I'm not sure how many people are already aware of your stuff. You've got a couple of books. We'll talk about those. You've done a PhD. Goodness gracious me. People will have no sense for time. It's a wonderful thing. Can you just fill us in a little bit on, we've said a couple of things about you, but just basically what you're doing. What's a bit of your story? What's that you'd like to share with people?
Well, I had my own difficult adolescence and difficult family conflict, and as many of us do, that lead us into working with similar people to ourselves, turning the mirror, back towards us. But growing up, I loved summer camp. I was a terrible student. Even though you said books, I'm a painfully slow reader, like horribly slow, But when I went to summer camp, I was happy and I felt like I belonged and I had something to contribute. And so leaving high school, which was, I think, the greatest day of my life, never having to go to high school ever again, I ended up getting a job working outdoors with kids that were, quote unquote, naughty kids, substance use, behavioral issues, self-harming, lots of serious stuff going on. But at the same time, I was also training to be a firefighter in Maryland, just outside Washington, D.C. I just wanted to be useful somehow. And I looked at the firefighters I would be training to walk into a burning building or rip apart a car wreck with. And then I look at these naughty kids I'm working with in the woods and going, I'd kind of rather firefight with these kids. These are people you can trust, and look at how interesting they are, and they're engaged, and there's all these things. And I just thought, this is kind of a really nice way to engage with people, that being outside. And I had a social worker really take me under his wing. This is Brooke Brody. I've talked about him a lot. And he basically said, you have to go to university, and you can't get paid Burger King wages to live outside over half a year. And your girlfriend's going to leave you because you'd rather hang out in West Virginia in the woods than with her. And she did. And he was right. But it was I just never looked back at this idea of working outdoors.
Yeah, it's such. There's been some fantastic research, and there's been some books and people talking about things. We've got people also, we hear about extremes, but nature, David Attenborough, a lot of these things, and people are surprised, and I think it that type of surprise that we have of. When we go on holidays, I used to work on a cruise ship when I was younger. It's sort of not really right out, but people would relax, and at the end of the trip, they have lots of fun. They go to the islands. They really slow down, and then as they got off the boat, they'd say, "Oh, well, back to the real world."
Right,
like this thing we've invented, and that's what surprised me, and why I got interested in it, Will, because people were surprised how pleasurable nature was, whereas that's kind of where we came from. what do you find this barrier, this strange cutoff? Is it a dissociation? What could we call it that creates us thinking it's normal to be in a concrete jungle?
Well, this is, first off, what's really interesting is when I left high school, my school guidance counselor said, go work on a cruise ship and get out of here. And I just never, I probably would have never come back, but I never did. So interesting story.
Yeah, I did it for a while. Yeah.
Yeah. So we just got back from an International Adventure Therapy Conference in Norway. And the committee who puts all that together, the international committee, we have representatives from India. And one of my really good friends, Tanya Jinwala from India, she did a presentation. She was talking about our values. And she says, when she's out in the Himalayas, talking with farmers and people who know the land, when she says outdoor therapy, it doesn't make any sense, because this idea of improving your connection to something you're already connected to doesn't make sense to those people. And so we can get in a rut of saying, well, indigenous people have been doing this for forever and for the longest time. But what the sort of the fallacy with that argument is, there was a kinship with nature. It wasn't using nature. So we often think of go outside and let nature heal you. And this is sort of medicalizing something that's always around. And so we can get, and Alan Levinovitz, a philosopher of religious studies in America, he has a great book called Natural, which is about how this idea of natural good, unnatural bad, is creating some dichotomies that aren't actually leading to a lot of healthy, it makes us sort of worship nature and can turn that into sort of a religion. And then, and this is a trap for outdoor therapists, we think everybody needs to go outside instead of, someone might really like to sit in the confines of a safe, confidential office and be on the couch. There's nothing wrong with that. But I do think many of us are disconnected from the outdoors, and there's a real big importance in our work that outdoor therapy has often been perceived as where I started my career. Teenagers, very far away from home, doing serious adventure for a long time. Robin Williams sat with Matt Damon on a park bench in Boston, and it's everyone says that's the greatest portrayal of therapy in pop culture. It was outdoors on a park bench.
Yeah. Yes. And with the water in front of them and the ducks and
the cover of the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can I just backtrack just a little bit about the dynamics of being in nature and sort of being in a more controlled environment? So my perspective is that even when we are in nature, we still manufacture a bit of a controlled environment if we bring a tent, for example. And so it's not this thing that, total, being in the wild in a completely uncontrolled environment.
Yes, naked in the mud. Yeah.
Yes. Because
although that can be fun.
I think there's a balance there and an interesting dynamic between controlled environment and the wild, which is really interesting in our relationship in how we create a controlled environment with the outdoors. Did you have anything to sort of to comment about that?
If we take a trauma-informed lens to this, that an unpredictable environment is typically what leads to complex trauma in the childhood, if we're adopting that viewpoint. So there can be something risky about going outdoors where things unpredictable happen. And where someone, we talk about trauma coming from experiences with no escape. If you're very far in the outdoors, there often isn't an escape. And so we do have to be mindful of setting up, if we're doing something adventurous, that we set up as many opportunities for client choice as possible. And that gives a sense of control. And ideally, that's not just a perceived sense of control, that they're contributing to the adventure. And I think you're absolutely right that there is ways that we facilitate these different experiences, and in many ways the adventure is just a metaphor for the adventure we all go when we're in therapy anyway, or leading. Who knows where we're going to end up? And so we talk about people's sense of adventurosity, that willingness to embrace the unknown and see where it goes and see what we come up with throughout this experience.
Oh, sorry, Matt, you go.
I was just going to say, but within the adventure, there's still, especially again through the lens of trauma and trauma therapy, we do have to have some semblance of control and have a controlled environment, right? Because otherwise, you could exacerbate,
that's why you need to have a bit of knowledge and background. It's not just going out and tough love. I've got a little example I'd love to get your comment on, Will. Yeah. It was a group, and they were largely sort of oppositional defiant group. Now, that had led to them to being with drugs and crime and so on and so on. But basically, they just really were pissed off with the world. And one of the rules that they said they went adventuring, and one of the rules was you've got to set up your own tent. Everybody's got to be responsible for their own safe environment when they get to a camp. Anyway, they're getting there, and the chap who was telling me this is with Canadian First Peoples. It was quite interesting. And anyway, they get to a storm is coming, and they can see these clouds are rolling in, and they're there, and my friend that was leading the group says, "Okay, everybody out with your tents, get going." So he's doing the tent, and of course, an oppositional defiant person will also self-sabotage. So they'll, so he was getting out the tent and not putting the spokes in properly, and sort of stumbling and fumbling and going, "I can't do this," and turning to my mate and said, "You've got to help me do this." And he just turned to him and he said, "I'm sorry, Brian," let's call him. "Sorry, Brian, this is between you and nature." And then he turned back and went working on his tent, and the kid worked it out. He sort of so that was a breakthrough moment, and there'd obviously been quite a few before. But that's sort of putting somebody back into the framework of you're not in a okay, certainly, as you say, things like unresolvable issues, wanting to escape, but in situations where putting someone in a situation like that, say, "You've got to solve this." I'm just wondering what your thoughts to and fro, up and down on that experience.
Well, there's kind of, we look back at the history of wilderness therapy, especially with youth, and there is quite a paternalistic and coercive nature, and get out of your comfort zone. And we still have that language permeate our literature, that we're pushing people out of their comfort zone, building self-sufficiency, these sort of things. And if this is such an important question, because what can be a breakthrough for one can be horrible for another.
Yeah, this is what I was thinking too as I was listening.
And so one of the things I learned working with Indigenous young people in Alaska was we did everything for everybody for the first few days. We were just really good hosts. And this was an alternative to going to prison. So they were pretty rough young people. And we wanted people to feel safe and feel cared for. And that way they would engage more in the adventure, where they didn't have an escape where it was, "I get to go home." It was, you can leave and go to jail. Like, that's fine. But what we wanted was, if during the first few days we made sure they knew how to set up a tent and really helped them and didn't overload them with skills. This is another thing people do. They take young people, let's say rock climbing, and they go, "This is a harness. It has 5 different buckles. This is a rope. You're going to have to tie a fish." All they're doing is staring at the cliff going, "Oh my gosh, how on earth am I going to climb that?"
Off the edge you go.
Put them in the harness so they don't have to worry about that, So we overload people with skills. And so one of the things with the tent is I'd want to make sure everyone knew how to set up a tent. And then when the storm comes, that person doesn't have to really overthink it. And it can be embracing the adventure, where the guide can be involved going, everybody hurry up, we've got to do this, in a really fun way, and build excitement and curiosity and engagement with the people. So there is times, and I think this is something that sort of unknowingly happens, where we view nature as the punishing parent teacher. And so we can think of how are you embracing getting rained on? Well, getting rained on sucks, like, right. It's not like, well, it can be really fun if you're getting muddy and you're playing and being exciting. But yeah, so it can go both ways. And I think when people feel, when you have that engagement, and I think this is the therapeutic, it's just in the therapeutic relationship, the safe container of the outdoors that you've tried to facilitate becomes a brave space to play, to adventure, to push yourselves, to challenge your thinking, to all these things that we do in the counseling room as well. It's just a little bit more active bodily engagement is probably the only difference.
Yeah. Can we just step back a second here? And the academic in me wants some definitions. So can we sort of define what wilderness therapy or outdoor therapy is, maybe with an example, just so that we can sort of get a clear picture of what you're actually doing out there?
Yeah. So there's a name game here. There's adventure therapy, wilderness therapy, nature-based therapy. That list goes on as long as the list of ACT, CBT, DBT goes. Yeah. It goes on forever. There's a ton of T's. Wilderness therapy is typically portrayed with a longer term expedition style backpacking or canoeing along a river for days on end. So that's typically longer. Adventure therapy is typically that tends to be more community-based and can be indoors. That can be a rock climbing gym. It can be in a gymnasium. It can be one-on-one or in groups. So that's a bit more of what it's more common to see that type of practice. The difference of that and nature-based, no one really knows. My colleague Nevin's probably going to kill me about saying that because he wrote a nature-based therapy book. It's actually really good. But it's not necessarily about that adventurous programming. We've all settled for adventure therapy as our terminology, and that's actually really quite limiting because people with disabilities often think, well, I can't go on adventures. People doing equine-assisted therapy outside don't view their work as adventurous, neither do the horticultural folks, which is why Nevin really looked at outdoor therapies as a commonality of this work, which is where that book sort of came from. And so that's where we wanted to look at what are all the therapies that are happening outside, what are their differences, what are those sort of things. The one issue with our terminology is there's an inherent belief that adventure therapy is enough of a term to be a model in itself, which is why we wrote the solution focused book. Now, I'm shamelessly solution focused. I can't get it out of me. It won't go anywhere. But I do understand the common factors, and I take that way more seriously, that I don't think me being outdoors or solution focused makes me a better practitioner than anybody else.
Yeah,
it does. I am a better practitioner working that way, though, than being inside and trying on different models. It's just, if I think about in social work, we talk about the use of self. That's just me. It's my makeup. It's my psychology. One of the issues is the outdoor therapies can be way too eclectic, and there's no roadmap. There's lack of theoretical understanding. So there's people going, well, trauma needs bilateral stimulation of the brain, and that's what hiking does. So that's what I do. But I also do a bit of CBT, and I use the miracle question, and there's some narrative journaling and letter, and it can become a gigantic mess, and it's not well. And that's I think one of the big hurdles of why the outdoors hasn't gained the recognition it probably deserves as just another way to engage people. And we have an engagement problem in psychotherapy.
Look, I'm a big believer in referring clients to the best, possible, therapies, therapists. And so as a talk therapist, I sit in an office and talk to people. How do I know what would be a good client to refer to someone like yourself? And because I don't really have any idea, because exactly like you said, it's not clearly defined. I don't really know what I'm referring my client to, although I have some idea that maybe outdoor therapy could be really helpful for them.
Right. Oh, this is such a good question. And I mean, for a lot of people, and this was what my PhD research found, is I work with teenagers, and that outdoor therapy isn't solely just for teenagers, but that's the dominant narrative. And so we'll stick with teenagers for the moment. Teenagers are often described in the literature as the most difficult people to engage in therapy. And I kind of think, and there's nothing wrong with sitting and talk therapy with teenagers. I know plenty of them that prefer it to going outside with me, and they can sit on the couch and do that, no problem. We're kind of doing something that evolutionarily doesn't make any sense. Hey, adolescent that wants to leave the nest, sit down and talk. And so
you're right. Exactly.
And so, like even as someone who's a pretty ADHD person myself, it's really interesting to think only in the last 1% of human history have we told them, sit down from 5 years old to 18, from 9 to 5 every day and learn from books.
Yeah.
So we've lost a lot of experiential learning from things, but this question of who to refer to is really interesting, because we know from the research that having a qualification makes for a confident practitioner doesn't necessarily predict how effective they are. So in the outdoor therapies, we have two pathways: people who come from the adventure angle and people who come from the therapy angle. And I would want to know what their competencies are in doing that. And I would like someone to be able to do the elevator pitch of what it is that their practice does, that was the sole motivation for the solution-focused outdoor therapy book. Was, here is a model from two people who have quite enough experience to write something down, and here's how we go about supervision. Here's how we go about doing our feedback informed stuff outdoors and building our own data. Here's how we work with referrers. Here's how we work with parents. I like that gets thought out, because time and nature can be really nice. Also, like Richard and I are calling in from Australia, where nature has a tendency to kill you here. So time and nature can be horrible at the same time.
Exactly.
And so what can happen in the outdoors? And let's take wilderness therapy, because I think this happens, and this is a trick. You've taken young people away from probably a difficult family context and out of high school. So they're on a camp. This is awesome. They don't have phones. They don't have drugs. They're eating well. This is what, is it Joseph Ardern?
John Arden?
Yes. Sorry. Yeah. So he talks about this SEEDS model. And sleep, education, exercise, diet, social interactions, SEEDS.
Yeah.
You're doing all of that. So clients feel good.
Mm.
And so then people start going, look at how happy these people are. This is amazing. That doesn't mean that person is emotionally or psychologically totally disengaged in any of the therapy. They're just sleeping better and eating well, and they look like a compliant client. And compliance in the therapy is not a therapeutic outcome. So then they get home, and when all the eruptions happen and the steps backwards and the figuring all of this out, the therapist can go, it's those parents. Meet the parent, meet the problem. And all we could have done something really nice. We provided a really nice experience for somebody, but the cash value of that long term. So we need more than just that baseline seeds. We need more than the feel good in nature. It has to have that roadmap. So I'd want to know that someone is able to discuss their framework for how they work, the roadmap, and that it's not just too eclectic or reliant on nature is healing as a baseline statement.
Yes, that serendipitous outcome, although that certainly can have its can occur. But yes, so what happens when it doesn't? So we need to know that they've got response to the serendipitous emergence, but also they've got response to when it isn't. So they can what I often call create opportunities in the appropriate circumstances. Cool. Sorry, Matt, you had some.
Yeah, no, I was just wondering about the time factor as well. I mean, anyone that goes on a short trip or just goes for a week overseas somewhere, you feel totally different. You can act very different. Like you were saying, you can dissociate from your regular life, and as soon as you come back, everything's the same. So in terms of, so I would imagine the engagement when you're out in the wild, it's full on, it's intense, like you said. Everything has changed, but does there need to be like a recurring exposure to that, or is so what can you say about the time factor of being exposed to your therapy?
Yeah, so this is one of the trickiest things in our field that we don't, especially in wilderness therapy, and we're going to poo-poo some of the practices in the United States here for a minute, that there is a movement of young people calling themselves survivors of America's troubled teen industry, which is a multi-million-dollar industry of for-profit programs, long-term, involuntary, and in the context outside of the United States, this makes virtually no sense, that a parent can involuntarily basically sign over medical consent to a behavioral health care program. And what happens is young person can be taken in the middle of the night, taken to the woods where there are licensed, qualified practitioners holding someone against their will. No judge, no assessment, no anything, just parents assessment, parent referral. And they're held for a very there's no fixed length of stay, an average of 90 days at $500 US a day.
Whoa.
Epic money. Over 50, and I'm going to misquote the data here, but I'll say I'm confident in this statement. Over 50% of those young people finish that program and do not go home. They go to a therapeutic boarding school or a residential treatment facility. And so if we all went to Google Scholar right now and typed in adventure therapy, I did this with students just last week. The first page of results, all but 2 of the references that come up are from those type of programs. So that's the dominant, one of the reasons myself, Nevin, and a few others have been so active in the literature and writing, is that we have a horrible dominant narrative in our field, which is take people away for long periods of time and then plop them back in once they've done 2 years away and wherever they are. And this is half of the research, if you went to my Google Scholar page, is about these involuntary practices, using nature as the prison for affluent white people. So if these were inner city, if not to be tokenistic here, but if these were inner city Black kids, they'd probably be in jail. But they have this affordance of going to the woods for a long period of time until their adolescence is over. So what we need, and this is the way and by the way, full disclosure, I worked at these programs. I know them very well, and I can empathize with these are not bad people who work at these programs. These are systemic, horrible practices. Right. And it took me coming to Australia and starting my own program. And I actually got very angry in the way I was trained. because some of these practices still come up like, oh my gosh, I can't trust this person. What do I need to do to make sure this person doesn't run away? And instead of going, this person wants to run away, I better go build some relationship with this person and figure out what's going on. And the first thing I realized coming to Australia is there's not many people doing expedition work that long term outside of the United States. My expeditions are 2 weeks. And that's typically, if a parent calls me in South Australia and says, I'd like my young person on one of your programs, and I go, well, my expedition's it's September now. It's not till October. Why don't they come to my office and we can start working together now? And I can see. And then if I get parents from interstate, I can't start working with that person right away. So there's a problem with that model. And so we encourage practitioners to really focus on working in their community, because what we tend to do is they come away on a program and we go, hey, Richard's a good therapist in your hometown. Go work with him. But then Richard has no context in what happened in the outdoors and has no link. They're not continuous. So if we do longer term expedition work, and 2 weeks is quite long in the Australian context. And again, this is cultural. When I talked about going to summer camp, I went for 8 weeks on end as a young person. I couldn't wait to get out of the house. I loved it. That doesn't happen as often here. And so we have to find a way to bring that adventure home to people. So we do things like make a video of the experience, take a lot of pictures. If the young person wants to walk around with the GoPro for a day and film their own adventure, I'll edit it and send it to them. They can have it. There's great things to do, like they can write letters to themselves that we can randomly mail them 6 months later from the expedition. So there's a lot of opportunity for giving them a T-shirt that doesn't look like I went to therapy camp, but like a badass adventure T-shirt, giving them outdoor gear. There's a lot of things we can do to remind them. And for instance, when the solution focused book, it's only getting in, technically, I have a copy of it, but it's only in print tomorrow. The first client who came on our expedition, 2 of them, we only had 3 kids on that program when we started, and we made no money. It was a total loss as a business move. And I was a bit hurt that, oh my gosh, I'm used to working with groups of 10. This is crazy. It was a remarkable experience. It was so cool. Just myself, an outdoor educator, and 3 young teenage boys. It was incredible. And 2 of those 3 have reached out and this week and have asked me, can I have a copy of the book? I don't know why they'd want to read a therapy book. Neither of them are therapists, but That was over 10 years ago. Wow. I'm not in contact with them. I don't have anything. I'm not still their therapist. I have nothing to do with them at all. And so there is something magical about helping people to keep that adventure going. Yep. Because just like any psychological intervention, the impact will decay with time. There will be new problems in people's lives, and they can always come back. And so we've never charged for follow-up services. If a young person wants to call and check in, they can. If they want to go canoeing for an hour, no problem. Let's go. I think that's an important thing, because it's very real to sleep in the dirt next to someone. And be, as Richard said, to be soaked in the rain and miserable. And so the more we talk about this in outdoor education, and I think there's implications for this in therapy. We talk about the Disneyfication or the McDonaldization of the outdoors, which is to think, which is to homogenize the adventure for everybody. And so if we go outside, we have to be open to what happens. That's that sense of adventurosity that we don't, and we do this in therapy a lot. When we get in a difficult situation with the client, we revert back to what we do naturally, and we go for the easiest thing instead of really leaning into, this is a super uncomfortable experience, and this is really hard. And going to supervision, going, I was not good today, and all of these things that we can do. So it's important that we know that this is somebody's real adventure, and it's not that we can't make it too fabricated. It won't land if it doesn't come across as real.
Yeah, there's got to be an organic aspect to it. Can I just make a comment about the videos and the photos? That is a brilliant therapeutic tool to consolidate memory. And because our memories are not real good. Every time we recall in our imagination, it changes. But to have video and photo cues that bring back the real visceral memory of what went on, I think that's a brilliant way to continue the power of the experience.
Yeah, and it allows them to go deeper too. We actually just watched a movie last night, a commercial movie that we'd seen before. It was Dune, which is you got depth, and I got so much more out of it. There was so much more I could see, and of course, so if you're looking at your own experience, there's sort of I can just see myself looking at myself going, oh yeah, I remember that. Oh, just a minute. Oh, look what I'm doing there. That sort of rediscovery and deeper discovery, and it's so that's really fantastic. And I suppose you get feedback on these sorts of things, Will?
Yeah. I've continued to I continue to refine and define what it is we do. And then COVID hurt expedition work greatly, which is a shame because it is just what I love more than anything else. And but one of the things I feel like we hit, well, we're always trying to get better, so we're not settling for what we've got. But right in 2020, we developed a parent program. So I'm always, because I do view it as a family therapy, but there is this youth focus, right? And one of the things we did, and I was so proud of this, is I made a workbook for the parents. And I made a webinar associated with every day their young person is in the bush. And it was all lighthearted, surface level, solution focused stuff. Describe your perfect day with your child. We did some psychoeducation. And parents filled this stuff out, and they have said, we finished that 3 years ago, and parents still reach out and say, every time things are difficult and things aren't perfect, I go back to all those things I wrote about where are we headed, not where are we going from. And then this is all suggestive, the solution focus leans on some Ericksonian stuff as well. Right. And so I think that it's really nice that parents, the adventure is this giant exception to the problem. And this is why solution focus landed on me so hard, is we're referred these kids that have been arrested, they don't go to school, and then they're engaged in learning in the outdoors, and they're patient and sitting still and dealing with stress and not self-harming, asking for help from adults, building a better relationship with a person of authority. All of these are gigantic exceptions to the problem. And if there's an exception to the problem that's lived out, that client has provided evidence to themselves that they can deal with some other things. And so what happens is when things inevitably go wrong and a parent calls, we go, okay, so we've had this exception. Let's look back at something that did work and find out what are the clues we have to already work with. And so sending parents on a metaphorical expedition with a workbook and all of this, and it's like little short 5-minute videos. And we talk about, like we did like a journal assignment. What is everything? Like, I think I wrote it in kind of a funny, suggestive way. I said, there's a fine line between careful and careless, and therapists sometimes don't know where that is. So I wonder, before we take your young person out in the woods, can you please let us know everything we should not change about your child? Because we don't want to change things that are really good about your child. Yeah. And sometimes and so parents write this, I have a long, extensive like we have to do risk assessment of who, we have to make sure we're taking someone that can be safe in the outdoors, of course. And so then we have this long list of the problem. And then like a week later, we get this huge list of everything that's great about their child. And then they start working. I go, oh, that's fantastic. And then we do things like, your child's returning home tomorrow, and we're not very good at gauging outcome. So what we need, though, are 10 to 15 signs over the next week, however small, that things have worked. What are they? Right. And so then they start looking for those things. And we call them, we say, well, you need to be our Sherlock Holmes of change. Can you please make sure you... So the whole family is on this journey of doing more of what works. Yeah. And so bringing the parents in as that key witness, the third party observer, to me, it solidified a lot of things. We ended up with way less phone calls about follow-up. This is because I'm a nerd that counts everything. That Daryl Chow keeps telling me to stop count. Only count what values. Stop counting everything. You're going to get vanity metrics if you keep counting all this random crap. But I do think there is it really bringing the family in on the journey even more. And I keep thinking how we can do that even more. I don't know. It gave everybody a sense of agency. And so the outdoor part is just it's just the experience. And then everything that happens after that is the magic, and how we can avoid this notion of you need to take my child away and reform them. And this is that model that I was talking about that I grew up in. I mean, I started working in the field at 18. It's steeped in religion. There's still conversion-ish therapy things happen, not under that name, but people referred to acting out against church values, like things that don't necessitate an involuntary secure care are leading people into something that's akin to this. And so that's a problematic narrative, because that is not taking young people with disabilities surfing and giving them a real adventure that maybe they're not afforded. And the surf therapy chapter of the Outdoor Therapies book blew me away, because they have a surf chair. So for people in wheelchairs, they get on a chair with a surfer and go on an amazing adventure.
That's so cool.
And I talked about Tanya from India. She worked for an organization called Adventures Beyond Barriers. I can send you a link to put in the show notes to this video.
Yeah.
This was created by a blind person, this organization. It's not really therapy, but this gets into the adventure part, where he believed that adventure is a way to improve social inclusion. And so what they did is they take people with a physical disability, such as being visually impaired, pair them with an able-bodied person, and they go on adventures. And I'm talking about adventures. Tandem bicycle in the Himalayas, 5 mountain passes, nearly 20,000 feet. Everest is 28,000 for context. No oxygen. They were the highest road for an automobile. They biked it on a tandem bicycle, a blind person and an able-bodied person. And what ended up happening was that organization grew and grew and grew. And a famous architect in India was like, I would like to volunteer, and I'll be the able-bodied person for an adventure. And he came back from that adventure and realized all the buildings he had created were not accessible to wheelchair and for visually impaired people. Out of his pocket, changed them.
Wow.
So there's so much other adventure therapy and outdoor therapy that isn't naughty teenagers being removed from home. And so I always love the opportunity to share stories of people doing incredible other work. In Finland, there's people working with stepfathers and stepsons, building relationship through doing things together. In Canada, there's an organization, Tip of the Toes Foundation, working with young people impacted by cancer, totally free, philanthropic funding. And once again, serious adventure. So a young person rings the bell, I've done my chemotherapy, and on the hospital wall is you want to go on an adventure? Are you a young person impacted by cancer? We'll pick you up. we'll fly you business class up to the Arctic, and we're going to do some whitewater rafting for 2 weeks. Or, you're really sick, and this is gonna take your life. Well, let's go on an adventure and let's go dog sledding in the Arctic and find the Northern Lights for you. So there's incredible other stuff happening in this work as well that is just remarkable. And it's just another possibility of doing something. I have nothing bad to say about talk therapy. Some people in my field do. I think that's a problem because we shouldn't be against each other. We should all be working together. Exactly. To make therapy cool again. And so I just think it's incredible the amount of stuff that is out there in this world of the possibility of opening the counseling room door and getting outside.
Yeah, and it's this thing of engaging, because I'm sure there's plenty of talk therapy around the campfire. Which goes on, and it's this multiple engagement, and of course all the stuff, and we'll probably have to wind up in a sec because of time. But what a beautiful sort of set of images you put forward, and my mentor Ernie Rossi, we use this word numinosum, reintroducing ourselves to the magnificent, the fantastic, the extraordinary, which, as you say, can occur in your room. It could occur in your bedroom. It can occur in the Arctic while whitewater rafting or bicycling up the Himalayas. And that introduction, that you've given us to what this is about, what the possibilities are. And I really appreciate, giving us not so much, I'm just using the word, the cautions, but those things to be aware of, that it's not just a blind-eyed wander, as long as you walk by a tree, you'll be fine. And although better to do that than nothing at all. So you've given us so much to think about. We want everybody to go out and look at these books. We've got the one in 2020, Outdoor Therapies. Then this one that's just come out, Solution-Focused Practice in Outdoor Therapy, with Steve. Oh, Steve Natchenchuk.
Yeah, that's another name. Stefan.
Yes.
Natchenchuk.
Yes. I almost had it. But like me and Nat, combining this co-creation stuff that you do in your writing, what an adventure we've actually been on today.
Thank you,
Matt. I think we have to go now. I don't want to, but I think we do.
Yeah,
I'm a rambler. Oh, good.
Dr. Will Dobud, thank you so much for being here on The Science of Psychotherapy, and thanks for introducing us to this wonderful world of your type of therapy. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks so much. It's an absolute privilege. I love the podcast.
Great stuff. Well, we'll see you again soon.